The sea was my cradle. I grew up on its shores, lulled to sleep by the rhythm of its waves and woken by its salty breeze. My father, a fisherman, used to tell me that the sea was alive. "It listens," he'd say, "so speak to it with respect." I never understood what he meant until much later, when I traded fishing nets for a uniform and a rifle. I'm Ensign Miguel Suarez, or just Migs to my friends. At 22, I was the youngest officer aboard the BRP Malaya, a patrol ship tasked with guarding the waters my father once called his livelihood. Back then, I believed in duty, in honor, in the idea that we were protecting more than just territorial lines. We were protecting our way of life. Little did I know, the sea would soon test every belief I held. My first deployment was quiet, almost peaceful. We patrolled near Pag-asa Island, watching over fishing boats that ventured into contested waters. The Chinese ships were always there, looming on the horizon like predators circling prey. They never attacked, not outright, but their presence was a constant reminder that we were outnumbered and outgunned. One night, during my first watch, I saw their lights blinking in the distance. They seemed so close, yet so far, like stars just out of reach. I asked my commanding officer, Captain Reyes, if we should prepare for anything. "They're watching, Suarez," he said, not looking up from his map. "And so are we. Just keep your eyes open." The spark that ignited the war came on a clear morning. The Malaya was escorting a convoy of fishing boats when we spotted Chinese Coast Guard vessels advancing aggressively. Their loudspeakers blared warnings, ordering us to retreat. Captain Reyes stood firm, instructing us to maintain our position. Then it happened. A Chinese vessel rammed one of the fishing boats, sending it reeling. Chaos erupted as another Chinese ship fired a warning shot, but this time, the shot wasn't aimed into the air. It struck the water dangerously close to the Malaya. Captain Reyes ordered evasive maneuvers, but before we could respond, a second shot hit one of our supply vessels, setting it ablaze. The Malaya returned fire, and for the first time, I felt the deafening roar of our ship's guns. I was stationed at the radar when the collision alarms blared. My heart pounded as I realized this wasn't just another standoff. This was war. The footage of the attack spread like wildfire. The Philippines' call for assistance was answered by the United States, which deployed warships to the region. The move enraged China, which accused the U.S. of meddling in its internal affairs. Russia, in turn, declared support for China, citing shared strategic interests. Other nations, including Japan, Australia, and Vietnam, began mobilizing their forces. The South China Sea became the epicenter of a global conflict. Our next mission was to defend Pag-asa Island, a critical outpost now under threat. As we approached, a formation of Chinese fighter jets roared overhead, forcing us to go on high alert. Within moments, explosions erupted around us as missiles rained down on the fleet. "Evasive maneuvers!" Captain Reyes shouted, gripping the rail as the Malaya veered sharply to avoid a direct hit. I manned the radar, calling out enemy positions as the gunners returned fire. The sea became a battlefield, littered with debris and engulfed in smoke. I'll never forget the sight of one of our ships sinking, its crew diving into the water amid the chaos. In the days that followed, the war intensified. Allied fleets clashed with Chinese forces in a series of brutal engagements. The Malaya was sent on a covert mission to intercept a Chinese supply convoy. Under the cover of darkness, we crept through the waves, our engines barely a whisper. When we made contact, the tension was suffocating. We opened fire first, targeting their lead vessel. The explosion lit up the night, and all hell broke loose. I was on deck, coordinating with the gunners when a missile streaked past, narrowly missing us. The impact from its detonation sent me sprawling. I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing, as I watched our crew fight with everything they had. Amid the chaos, a Chinese ship attempted to ram us. I grabbed a rifle and joined a boarding team, leaping onto their deck amid gunfire. The fight was brutal, close quarters combat with no room for hesitation. I still remember the fear in the eyes of a young Chinese sailor I disarmed. He wasn't much older than me, and in that moment, I realized how senseless this all was. The war's scope widened when Russia deployed its Pacific Fleet to support China. The United States responded by sending carrier strike groups, backed by NATO allies. Skirmishes erupted not just at sea, but in the skies and on land. Missile strikes targeted bases, cities, and naval installations, leaving devastation in their wake. It wasn't long before the conflict spilled onto the land. China launched an invasion of the Philippine mainland, attempting to establish a foothold. U.S. Marines and Filipino soldiers joined forces to repel the attack. I was reassigned to a ground unit defending Palawan's strategic airfields. The battles were relentless. Chinese tanks rolled through villages, their advance supported by drones and artillery. We dug in, using every bit of cover the jungle could provide. During one firefight, my unit ambushed a Chinese convoy, disabling their lead vehicles with shoulder-fired rockets. The ensuing chaos gave us the upper hand, but it came at a cost. The air was filled with smoke and the cries of the wounded. The tide began to turn when Allied forces launched a coordinated assault on Chinese strongholds in the region. In one of the largest operations, I was part of a multinational force tasked with reclaiming Manila, which had fallen to Chinese forces early in the war. The battle for the capital was fierce. Street by street, building by building, we pushed them back. I'll never forget the sight of tanks rolling through Roxas Boulevard, their turrets firing at enemy positions. Snipers hid in skyscrapers, and drones buzzed overhead, dropping explosives. It was a hellscape, but we fought on, driven by the thought of freeing our homeland. The turning point came when U.S. and Japanese forces launched a massive amphibious assault on China's mainland. The move stretched China's resources thin, forcing them to retreat from the Philippines. Their supply lines were severed, and their forces demoralized. The final blow came in Beijing itself. Allied forces, including Russian defectors who opposed their government's support for the war, launched a decisive attack. The Chinese government, facing internal unrest and economic collapse, sued for peace. I watched the news from a field hospital, recovering from injuries sustained during the Manila campaign. The sight of leaders signing a ceasefire agreement should have brought relief, but all I felt was exhaustion. We had won, but at what cost? Years later, I sit by the shore, looking out at the waves. The sea is quiet now, but I know it remembers. It carries the echoes of our battles, the lives we lost, and the lessons we learned. I've written this story to honor them, the fishermen who stood their ground, the sailors who gave their lives, and even those on the other side who fought for reasons they believed in. The sea belongs to all of us, but we forgot that. Maybe now, we'll remember. As I watch the sun set over the water, I hear my father's voice in my mind. The sea listens, Miguel. Speak to it with respect. I hope we've learned to listen too.